All right, so we're going to get started on the Mazooks project, but the first thing I want you to do is I want you to install something called Koala, which is a Sass compiler, a less and Sass compiler. And Sass is a CSS preprocessor that allows you to use things like variables and so on, nesting. We're going to look at some of those features, but most importantly, I'm going to show you how to use Bootstrap with Sass. So if you wanted to change, let's say, the primary color, where you have button primary and BG primary, you can change that from within the Sass variables file that comes with the Bootstrap source code. Now, there's a lot of different ways to compile Sass. In the old course, we used gulp, but it was a lot of work. We had to create a big JavaScript gulp file, and I realized that a lot of people that are learning Bootstrap, they don't really know a lot of JavaScript. They're basically just getting into like HTML, CSS, and it confused a lot of people. Most of the Q&A stuff had to do with gulp and NPM, and it just got really complicated. So I figured in the revision of the course, we'd do something simple and just use a basic GUI program, which is very efficient. And it is cross-platform, so whether you're on Windows, Mac, or Linux, you should be able to run it. If you want to do something more complicated and use gulp or use NPM, use Webpack, whatever it is that you want to compile your Sass, you can do that, Node Sass. But I want to keep this simple for people that aren't really at that point yet. Okay, so just download this, install it. I already have it installed, so once you do that and open it up, it should look something like this. Very simple interface. Basically, we just want to create our project folder and then add it to it. And we're just going to set a couple options. So let's create a new folder for our project, and we're going to call this Mazooks. So let's say, if you're wondering where I got these weird names, it was from just a random name generator. So let's say Mazooks. And I'm going to grab everything, I'm going to grab everything in the BS4 boiler and bring that over to our new folder. Now, in addition to this, though, we need a place for our Sass files. Now, when we write our CSS, it's going to be in files with a .scss extension. That's the Sass extension, and that's how it knows to compile that stuff. And then what it does is it spits out a regular CSS file from the Sass files. And that's what Koala is going to do for us. So let's create a folder called SCSS. Okay, and we're actually going to have our own custom style.scss. So let's create that. So it'll be style.scss. All right, and then what we want to do is go to getbootstrap.com, and if we go to download, and we want the source files. So the source files will actually include all the Sass files as well. So we're going to grab that, and let's open that when done. And you'll see a folder called SCSS. So we want to click on that. And basically what Bootstrap does in most frameworks that use preprocessor, they have all of these different files. So for each thing, like modals, the nav bar, pagination, they all have their own SCSS files with their own styling. And you see how they have underscores? That's basically an include file. So these won't get compiled to a regular CSS. Basically, what's going to happen is they're all going to be combined into this one bootstrap.scss file, and that's the one that we want to compile. Now, when we want to edit, like let's say button colors or something like that, then we want to edit this variables file. That's really the only file that we're going to need to edit. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of this and put it into the SCSS folder. Okay, so we want the mixins. The mixins is basically like functions in Sass, but we want to grab all of this and just bring it over. All right, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and go to Koala, and we're going to just click this plus sign to add our project. And mine is on my desktop, so let's say desktop Mazooks, and I'm going to click OK. And then we need to decide what we want to compile. and where it should go, where the regular CSS file should be spit out. By default, it'll be in the SCSS folder. I don't want that. I want it to go into the CSS folder. So let's take a look. We have the Bootstrap Grid CSS, Bootstrap Reboot. I don't want these to compile. I just want the Bootstrap and our custom styles SCSS. So what I'm going to do is just go to this, and I'm going to uncheck auto compile. Same with the reboot. I'm going to uncheck that. And let's uncheck source maps as well. I don't want to do any source maps. And then for Bootstrap SCSS, I'm going to keep auto compile. I'll get rid of the source map. And if we right click, you'll see this set output path. So I'm going to click that. And I want to set the output to go to the regular CSS folder. Now it needs a file as well. So what we'll do is add in here bootstrap.css. That's what I want it to get compiled as. So if I click save, now you'll see this line right here shows where that's going to get compiled and spit out. Now for the style.css, I want it to auto compile, meaning I don't have to manually click compile. I don't want the source map. And I'm going to set the output path to the CSS folder to this style.css and save. It already exists. Yes, we want to replace it. Okay, and then let's see this here, combine import. Let's deminify it. We'll just uncheck that. All right, so basically these two Sass files will get compiled to Bootstrap CSS and Style CSS. Now you don't see Bootstrap CSS here because it hasn't actually compiled yet. We can go ahead and manually compile this now. So if we go to Bootstrap CSS and I click compile, it'll do its thing, and there it is. So that's the compiled version. If I go on style.css and compile, there's nothing in it, but it'll still run. And whatever was, if we put something in here, any kind of Sass, it would compile to regular CSS. Okay, and that's really all we have to do to set up. As long as we have Koala running, this stuff will auto-compile. So now let's open up Mazooks with VS Code. And what I'm going to do here, you can see we have our Sass folder, and it has all the Bootstrap stuff. You could put this in a subfolder if you want, but I'm just going to leave it like this. And the only files we really need to pay attention to is our style.SCSS. That's our custom file. And it looks like it already compiled it here, so we can actually delete this, as well as this Bootstrap CSS. All right, so we have our custom one, and then if we look at underscore variables, this is where we can change all the different colors and spacing. So if we wanted like MB2 to be 0.35 or something like that, we can change that. So we can create a completely customized Bootstrap file, and it'll get compiled to that Bootstrap CSS. All right, so let's go to our index.html, and instead of using a CDN, which is this link here, we don't want to use the CDN because that's just an already compiled version of Bootstrap. We want to include this right here, this custom Bootstrap CSS file. So I'm just going to go ahead and change this to CSS/Bootstrap CSS and save. All right, so now just to test it out, let's do let's see, let's put a link formatted as a button, and we'll say BTN warning. And we'll just say test. I'm going to delete this after, but let's just make sure everything's working, everything compiles. So I'm going to run this with live server. And you'll see that we have a yellow warning button, which is just the default Bootstrap coloring. Now, if I go back to VS Code and we go to our SCSS and we go to variables, and let's go up to colors, and you see that yellow has a certain hexadecimal color. And if we go down to these primary, secondary success, warning is set to yellow. So I could change the version of yellow if I want, or I could change everything that's warning to be orange. So if I change this to orange and I save this, it's going to compile automatically. It should. And if we go back to our browser, now the warning button is going to be orange, and anything to do with warning is going to be orange. So this is how you can really customize your Bootstrap. Okay, so I'm just going to go back and just undo that change that I just did in the variables and save. So it should recompile. And again, what it's doing is compiling into this Bootstrap CSS, which we're including in our index file right here. All right, so now that everything is set up, in the next video, we'll go ahead and we'll get started on actually building our theme. Let me just get rid of this right here. And now we should be ready. All right, so I will see you in the next video.